Maps, plural. Map, singular. A tool used by people since ancient times to map their surroundings, to know where to go, or to define borders between tribes, kingdoms, or other kinds of state and geographical boundaries. It's that boring thing that used to hang in classrooms all over the world, likely a big piece of laminated special paper that you used to find boring or even useless. I know I thought little of them during my time in school, and I'm sure most kids or teens don't care all that much for maps really. So why the f do maps suddenly turn me the f on? What is it with the country borders, the right nation colors on a sharp backdrop, and the twists and turns of shores that gets me in the morning? Why the fuck is the map of Europe so f***ing succulent? Someone get me God on the phone? I am a strategy gamer. I've played strategy games since I was around 12 years old. My earliest memories of the genre involve games like Battle for Middle-earth, Star Wars Empire at War, and Command & Conquer Generals. 3 of arguably the best classic RTS games out there in my opinion. But strategy is one thing. If you know these games, you'll notice that very little of what goes on here actually takes place on a classic map. Sure, Middle-earth technically has a campaign section here and there, where they actually show you the world of Middle-earth from up high, and Star Wars Empire at War has a star map of the galaxy, but all it does is show you the planets and the space lanes between them. So for the most part, the gameplay revolves around fighting, building bases, and fighting some more. They're all classic action games on a larger scale and with heavy tactical elements if you'd like. In other words, to find out what's really happened to me in my later years, we must go deeper. And no, I don't mean that I suddenly began studying maps or globes or anything. No, I just took my strategy gaming deeper. Namely from RTS, real-time strategy, to the more refined, gentlemanly, posh-sounding genre of grand strategy. The Total War series was where I first truly met the concept of a campaign map, a realm separate from action and battlefields where true strategy is exercised. And Total War looked good. I mean, no other titles had this level of visual fidelity really, and the games just kept getting more detailed, bigger and bigger and bigger. But I want you to pay attention to something here. The maps of Total War, while showing us the empires on its maps, does remain a standard type map. What I mean by this is that what we're seeing here is still the geography, still the trees and the fields and the forests. Now while beautiful and let's face it, a rather decent way of learning the location of cities and history, still doesn't get me hooked in and of itself. It was still what I loved though, and if other games look different, I mean anything I thought messed up the natural look of this map, it kinda turned me off really.
Their early work was a little too new wave for my taste. But when
CK2
came out in
2012.
I think they really came into their own, commercially and artistically.
But one day, I finally gathered up the courage, finally took the plunge, and started my journey in Paradox's Crusader Kings 2. Now this game is deep and complex for 1,000 different reasons, but you have to understand my current or future map lover. The most important part of this game isn't the gameplay, no, not the intrigue, the dynasty management or the warfare, not at all. It's the map, silly.
Just like the pineapple.
Give me that goddamn map! Fuck you!
The campaign map of Crusader Kings 2 was off-putting to me at first, I gotta say. I mean, why would the main campaign map be so focused on coloring its entire being in the colors of its kingdom? Sure, you could apply various map modes, even one actually showing the terrain, but playing with that made it so much harder, since naturally, you want to know who controls what, especially since this is a real-time game, with 1,000 things happening at once. This is what did me in. It didn't happen all at once. I didn't understand that it was happening while it happened, but it certainly did happen. You see, color can be fun, color can be enchanting, and yes, color can be addicting, especially when there are several colors at play. You see, you won't notice it at first. You're focused on the gameplay, on the second-to-second action. In fact, you're focused on just surviving, of making it past the next tick. Ticks, by the way, is the moment in the game when the systems refresh. So for example, when you get your next batch of income, or your new points, or when the game autosaves. Kind of like a real-time turn in a way. In other words, for most people, if not everyone playing, or beginning to play these games, the map is in the background, always there, but almost used as scenery in comparison to the gameplay windows you need to keep paying attention to. Let me rephrase that. The map isn't just in the background, it is the background, and this makes it ever present. Whether you're playing Crusader Kings 2 or Europa Universalis 4 or even Hearts of Iron 4, there is no screen, no event, not one, where the map isn't. Like nicotine, the maps of Paradox games silently seeps into your brain, slowly wraps itself around your every limb, and makes you obsessed. This is where those colors come back into play. Like many children, I love the drawing and coloring, and part of the fun is coloring the way you want to. The only difference is, I never had the idea of an entire empire backing up the colors of my cartoons. And for the past 10 years, I wholeheartedly believe that this looks better than this. That terrain is elevated by color. And that, yes, Europe is fucking sexy.
This right here is my favorite thing, ever. In the history of forever. I think about this every day. I think about this all night long. I stay awake, not sleeping, because I'm thinking about this.
I mean, it had to be said, right?
Goddamn right.
Have you seen how the Byzantine Empire hangs heavy into the Mediterranean Ocean below, reaching both left and right for some semblance of stability? How France is comfortably backed up towards the Atlantic Ocean in the west, but that Europe doesn't end there. No, there's a whole ass island at the very edge, almost like some fantasy universe where you need to have some weird species living on it to challenge the continentals. How Iberia so effortlessly reaches out towards Africa and creates a narrow strait that in a fashion so out of this world forms an ocean that once upon a time was completely surrounded by one single empire. And what color does uniquely is that it acts as a substitute for natural boundaries. With color, North Africa, the Levant, and Anatolia is no longer an unbroken length of mostly deserts and mountains, but a stretch of various empires big and small, at one point dominated by a few rival hegemons. Germany and Central Europe is not just a patch of green and brown, but a different patchwork altogether. In one era, a mangled mess of dozens of various states. In another, a somewhat smaller patchwork dominated by two would-be leaders. And later still, we find a Europe no longer up for grabs by the lucky and fortunate, but one of few remaining great powers willing to risk it all and threaten to set it all aflame. It's what gives a bit of structure to the massive steppes and landmasses of East Asia, and what tells us, without a doubt, why the European powers at one point in history came upon the impossible task of keeping its growing and burgeoning colonies in check.
That's quite big. Impressive. Ooh, that's kind of small. Yikes.
Color is what separates the casual from the expert, what turns dirt and sand to sculpted, colored marble, and what brings strategic life and human history to nature. But for me, it's what made maps fun. Color showed me politics and history and contextualized every map they colored in. As a strategy gamer, apart from the fun of gaming, the way these colors spread around the map, and the way your color in particular spreads around as you succeed, makes you not just appreciate the visuals here, but the map you're doing it all on. Indeed, I think a big part of why I'm such a fan of maps as these living things is because it kind of goes hand in hand with the way of understanding history itself. There's a branch of history that focuses on how geography and nature itself has shaped cultures and histories, which actually turns out to be extremely important. Take the rise of Egypt, for example, and try to explain it without the presence of the Nile, or understand the wars of Germany and France without taking into account the mineral-rich regions of the Ruhr and Alsace-Lorraine. Or indeed, there's no way to fully comprehend why the Middle East saw large empires rise and fall without the presence of the Fertile Crescent, or why the United States, a republic born so recently, became the world's only superpower, without understanding their place as essentially the only quote-unquote empire around, with seemingly infinite amounts of natural resources up for grabs, and with coastlines in both the east, south, and west to connect it to the rest of the world. I think the colors and distinct factions of our campaign maps kinda works in the same way. Even though we don't get things fully explained, we can at a glance in real time see empires shrink and grow, remember how small or large they used to be, and see how far things have come after hours and maybe days of gaming. We can understand from day one how the world looks, who the main players are, and what you're up against in this vast world where almost anything is possible. And when everything comes together, the knowledge that you have led not just any nation, but your nation forward is just addicting. And perhaps you'll find that size doesn't always matter, but that playing tall can be meaningful too, as long as your color remains, that the color is the correct shape, and that you know that within that color, everything you've done and will do will keep your legacy secure. Indeed, just as massive empires can be fun to look at, so can those smaller patches of color be just as interesting.
That's the cutest fucking thing I've ever seen in my entire life.
As long as you put qualities to them and spend time with them. And in games like these, that's exactly what we do for thousands of hours. But if I have to take a closer look at this and be honest with myself, I think a part of why I've become so interested in the political map in the first place is probably because it allows me to imagine and project a sense of power and hegemony onto the geographical canvas. There definitely exists a sense of ego here, a sense of will to power, or at the very least an aspiration of the projection of power. But importantly, not just for the nation I'm leading, because somehow, these map projections kind of manage to work as entire stories and games in themselves. In the beginning of EU4, you can clearly see which powers are scary and who will be the final boss tier enemies unless you choose to play them yourself, in which case, you'll be powerful from the start, sure, but might find the game to be too easy depending. Other games might hide the might of their empires, or deceptively promotes them, like in the Fallen Eagle mod for Crusader Kings 3, where 2 Roman empires clearly dominate this map, but where at closer inspection, we know that they are far from stable on the inside. I find it so fascinating to see where these colored borders meet, because it tells us the history of where people met, or indeed where they split, and perhaps even why they couldn't make it further. But it's no secret that grand strategy games are complex adventures, but that at their heart lies the experience of power trips. I, and probably many people like me, personify these patches of land thanks to how these maps look, and it's almost like I'm creating personas or entire beings just from these combinations of colors. I realize this might sound crazy, and I may not explain it all that well, but it kind of is what it is, and I'm rather fascinated by it. This is all to say that maps indeed are fascinating things, and that by doing something so seemingly small and weird as coloring a piece of land or larger regions, we change the entire perspective of what a map means and what it can convey, and that is extremely enticing. I was never a particular fan of maps before my meeting with Crusader Kings 2 and Paradox games, but these titles did give me a new appreciation for maps and the history they are able to convey and depict simply from a snapshot in time. It's why I've personally gone to the lengths of creating my own damn map mods for Paradox games when I find that the vanilla maps lack a proper color or color entirely. And whereas I before would have diagnosed myself with some sickness for doing so, I know in my heart that I've corrected a broken piece of our timeline when I finally click upload mod. I know I'll never look at maps the same way again, especially when Italy's ankle is looking especially curvy tonight, okay? Okay, I'll stop.
Yikes.